All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our 2024 preview and prediction for the Ole Miss Rebels. Looking at the staff, Lane Kiffin, after 4 years, has accumulated a 34-15 record. Charlie Weiss Jr., third year on staff as the offensive coordinator. And then Pete Golding, second year in the role as the DC. Massive offseason for the Rebels. Big momentum win in the Peach Bowl as well over Penn State. And, of course, their only losses came to Bama and Georgia, the two teams that competed in the SEC championship game. Look at this offense. Ole Miss has a lot coming back, along with some great ads in the portal. 35 points per game last season. Jackson Dart showed some nice progression. Played much better. Only had 5 ENTs. The comp rate, yards per attempt, and yards per game all improved. Isn't exactly at that level of Matt Corral in terms, gashing through the air like he was a couple of seasons ago. But he should take major steps here in year 3. Was much more valuable as a runner at the goal line, an aggressive runner at that. Showed good timing on the inside breaking routes. Really ran the RPO well with good accuracy on slants. Nice velocity when throwing downfield. Good mobility in the pocket. Drastically improved the downfield touch. Often had his offensive line in his face, and he was still able to see through them and fire good balls. I think year 3 for Jackson Dart in Lane Kiffin's system, Nick. I think upside is great for him. I think Heisman podium is going to be expectation for me. And I know there's a lofty expectations, but here in this system with this much talent, you should be able to accomplish that.
Very high upside potential for Jackson Dart. I think he's a very good quarterback. I think, Heisman podium is a little too far for me. I'm not really ready to make that sort of leap. I do think the jump from year 1 to year 2 was very solid for Jackson Dart. I think he's developing into a really solid quarterback in the SEC. 65% comp rate, 3,300 yards passing, 23 touchdowns to that 5 interception ratio. Solid numbers there, the 5 turnovers. Not a terrible number. Certainly kind of, below what you were expecting from Dart. I think it's a good number, kind of right in that single digit sweet spot there at 5. Really solid. Good accuracy last year. Solid in the pocket. Was decent on the run as well. 389 yards rushing, plus 8 scores for him. So he does have that bit of a dual threat capability. 30 touchdowns between the two, passing and rushing for him. Not a bad number at all. I think Dart's continuing to learn the playbook very well, and obviously he returned some nice talent at wide receiver and some talent added from the portal at running back and wide receiver as well. So certainly some guys to throw to for him. It's good offensive line in front of him. Dart certainly has a sky-high potential. I'm a little more cautiously optimistic, but I can certainly see him taking that next step this year and even improving even more on what was a really solid season last year in year 2 in the system.
In this wide receiver room, only got better. Returning Trey Harris, a really good outside wide receiver. Thrives with being physical, winning jump ball scenarios. 6'2", 205. Showed nice yak. Had 4 touchdowns in the season opener, only 4 more the rest of the year, so certainly want to find, more touchdowns on his behalf. Jordan Watkins finally emerged and performed at a high level. Really good separator, smooth out of the break for him. Good upfield route runner, a physical blocker as well, 5'11", 190. They pick up Juice Wells, a guy from South Carolina who only played, a couple of snaps last year due to injury. A good route runner, explosive player who has good physicality. Isn't, a separation specialist by any means, but is a highlight reel player. 2 years ago, obviously, he was a good stat sheet stuffer for them. They added ex-4-star Deion Smith, a rangy pass catcher at 6'4", has good speed as well, but did miss spring ball. Aiden Williams was a gem for them in last year's class, a good route runner, 190 pounds. Speedy slot receiver, and Caden Lee had 2 big touchdowns on his 5 receptions. Added Marquise Willis, the brother of Malik, and Devin Price as well. So a deep room here, plenty of talent to share the wealth too. Of course, tight end Caden Pressicorn really turned it up late in the year when he was finally healthy. This is a great receiving core, Nick, one of the best you'll find in the entire country. What can they do, though, to make sure they do not let down Jackson Dart?
Very exciting receiving core. I think there's a lot of talent here. Trey Harris, nearly 1,000 yards receiving, 18.2 yards per grab, 8 touchdowns. When you saw him score those 4 touchdowns in the season opener, I believe against Mercer, you were excited, right? You're like, wow, what could this guy do? This guy's on an incredible potential pace here. Only ended up getting 4 more touchdowns. Obviously, a regression to the mean was expected at some point with Harris. You'd like to see him potentially get double-digit touchdowns this year. I think it's certainly capable for a guy that's so talented there. You plug him into this offense, continue and play him at the X position. Very excited to see what he can do. Jordan Watkins, 741 yards receiving, 14 yards per grab, and 3 scores solid there. Caden Perskins, the tight end, 449 yards receiving, 15 yards per grab, and 4 scores for him. Solid numbers there. They used the running back Bentley out of the backfield as well as a pass catcher on different occasions. A lot of different great portal ads you highlighted there. Juju Wells at the Z, I think, is a very underrated ad out of South Carolina. Didn't quite figure it out in Columbia, but I think he's got sky-high potential and a real nice opportunity to succeed here in Oxford. This wide receiving room is fantastic top to bottom. There's no doubt about that.
The biggest storyline of this offseason was Quinshot Judkins going to Ohio State. Obviously, this guy's been highly productive in his first 2 seasons. I think, him and Lane Kiffin not exactly seeing eye to eye, I think was kind of the sentiment there. And so his response was Lane Kiffin fashion, Nick. He decided to form an Avengers-like squad here at running back. Henry Parrish returns, a guy who's a slashing runner with great initial burst, very light on his feet, which allows him to make smooth cuts. Really impressive speed as well. Ulysses Bentley, been around a couple of years now, explosive burst, also has good long speed. Can be creative at the second level. Is a smaller frame guy though, but I like his vision, contact balance. I think he does a good job versus lighter boxes as well. Really thrives when he gets vertical. Logan Diggs was a surprise transfer from LSU, but the Tigers ended up losing him in favor of the Rebels. A violent runner, was productive in a loaded room last year for LSU. Had 200-yard games versus top 10 teams. Wasn't heavily used last season though. Obviously, they also just got Rashad Amos as well, a 1,000-yard rusher from Miami of Ohio, a power back at 234. Was greatly efficient last season. Incredibly deep unit. They even had another 1,000-yard rusher in Ja'Cory Merritt from New Mexico. Obviously, with how deep this room is, he decided to flip to Arizona. But I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do with this much depth, Nick, and I don't know why these guys have all decided to stay put. But obviously, there's a plan in place. And again, in Kiffin's fashion, this is completely sticking it to Judkins.
Judkins, the move for Judkins didn't make a whole lot of sense for me. It felt like he wasn't really making a smart move. I know NIL probably played a role, but he could have been the number one back for a team. And Kiffin, a lot of Ole Miss fans were upset when Judkins left because Kiffin kind of plucked him out of Alabama, the state of Alabama, where there wasn't a whole lot of interest in him out of high school. He wanted to play for the University of Alabama. Nick Saban didn't even look at him. He wasn't really highly recruited at all. He ended up getting picked up by Kiffin and burst on the scene as a true freshman. He became a star at Ole Miss, 176 yards rushing per game was what this unit put together. Now he finds himself in Ohio State. I think could be productive. It's a bit of an head scratcher still. Rashad Amos, though, is the one guy I'm looking at here and circling as the most interesting ad. Amos was phenomenal at Miami, Ohio. A really solid runner, great speed, really good slasher, really good high football IQ. This is an ad that could be a really incredible ad. I think it's underrated compared to some of the other ads in Henry Parrish and Logan Diggs, who are two guys that are proven at high quality programs. I think Bentley's still a solid back that can take over and be a good leader for this team. A lot of talent to go around here, but I think Amos is going to surprise a lot of people and be a really good underrated back out of this backfield.
Now, looking up front, I think the biggest issue with this offense is, will the upside be limited by the offensive line? I know some people are considering them a top 10 unit. I just don't see it, though. They're really poor in games versus better opponents. Bama dominated them. Georgia dominated them as well. They grab a new left tackle, Diego Pounds, 6'6", 330. Strong finish to the year. Was a solid pass blocker. Was a starter for the entire season. Logged a lot of snaps last year at his respective school. Jaden Williams moves down to backup, who was pretty lackluster in pass pro in his appearances. They added both starting guards from Washington last year in what was the best offensive line in the country, the Joe Moore Award, Nate Kilepto, Julius Buelow. But those two were the weak links of what was a stellar unit. I thought both got smoked against Michigan. They had good games against tougher opponents, though, at times. Gerquan Scott from Southern Miss was average at 6'6", 340. Should slot in at center or be guard depth. He's going to battle last year's starter Caleb Warren, who wasn't all that good. Jeremy James coming back is big for them. He can play guard or tackle on that right side. Was a good run blocker for them. Offensive line is in much better shape. They finally have some depth, but they didn't land players that will excite you for monumental improvement. Micah Pius coming back is good at tackle. Lots of penalties, though. Often lunges in the blocks. He has good length and mobility for the size. Good first step. I think he's a good down blocker in the run game at 6'7", 360. He got folded versus stunts, though. Hands don't always show great power. Needs to anchor down sooner. So this offensive line is certainly kind of up in the air right now. It looks like Pitas will be the right tackle. Stunts, communication, just flat out losing 1v1s all plague this offensive line, Nick. Plenty of knowledge coming in over from that Washington duo. And they have added great size. But I'm really not sure about this offensive line. I think it might hold them back because we need to see some progression here. But how they looked against the two teams they lost to, it was just ugly.
Maybe this is what's concerning me about this offense. I can't seem to put together what's worrying me about this offense, this team as a whole. Maybe it's the O-line that's really the big issue for me right here. I think they plug in some solid guys. I think Pounds is a good ad. I think Kalepo is a good ad as well on that left side. Those two guys could really be solid players, but I do get a little concerned about that. I think Pettis' mistakes at right tackle, his penalties are a big issue. His footwork worries me as well. Caleb Warren, want to see what I can see out of him. Jeremy James, is he going to plug in at right guard? Are you going to put one of the transfers in there as well? Scott from Southern Miss, what is he going to look like? Could you potentially plug him at right guard? I'm a little concerned about this offensive line. I think they're not as good as a lot of people in some media organizations are hyping them up to be. I do think there's some issues here. I think Pettis concerns me with the false starts and other issues on the offensive line on the right side. This might be the big thing for me that's really worrying me, is because if this offensive line struggles, Dart's going to get hit a lot, not going to have time to throw, and the running back room's going to struggle.
Offensive verdict, Kiffin has cooked up a nasty unit here. Most casuals won't be aware of some of the key role players this unit has, but the running back room is the nation's deepest, while the pass catching group feels confident with at least 6 or 7 different players. This unit's success, again, really comes down to Dart's continued progression and offensive line that seems to be in better shape, but the improvements there must be significant to compete for a national championship. Love this offense. A third year in Kiffin's offense, though, should lead to a massive paid-off dividends for Jackson Dart. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, a unit that Kiffin's really had to anchor down and improve during his tenure, and I thought last year was probably their best unit, down the 40th in points per game allowed. Did great work in the portal, along with 6 returning starters. Early in the year, LSU had 223 rushing yards and 3 scores, and then Penn State in the bowl game averaged over 5.5. So that's certainly an area they continue to want to work on. And what do? They go out and land Walter Nolan, a guy who has a really good leg drive, matched with a great first step, high-level disruptor, great tackler in the hole, former 5-star recruit with great play strength at 6'4", 290. And returning alongside him are some NFL caliber players. J.J. Pegues at D-tackle, a high motor, great havoc record who makes strong bear hugs in the hole. Some great burst for his size at 315 pounds. Does lack consistency in tackling, though. Another pro-ready body off the edge in Jared Ivey. Good speed to power. Love the length. Good technique as a tackler. Showed good production last season as well. Princely Unimanellan from Florida. Great burst as a wide 9 rusher. Does a good job with his hand placement. He loves that spin move. Needs to improve in terms of working strictly downhill. Has been a solid run defender, but he can get washed away by down blocks at 6'5", 254. Edge depth is not all that great. True freshman Cam Franklin was a top 50 recruit. Nice athletic player, might be able to play inside. Redshirt freshman Chamberlain Campbell will also be in the fold. Xavier Harris, a big body up front. Wasn't as stout as expected, but he sits at 6'7", 345 and can be a key rotational piece. Akilo Stone, on the other hand, was a great run stopper for him. This is a much improved defensive line, Nick, in terms of talent and that much needed size. Physicality overall is going to be the biggest question mark, and that hampered them versus those tougher opponents, but this might be the unit that get it done.
I like what they returned here on this defensive line. Jared Ivey, 46 total tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Your leading returner in that, leader on the team in that last year. Solid numbers. J.J. Pegues, 42 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Good numbers. Xavier Harris, 30 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Akil Stone, 27 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks. Solid numbers there, top to bottom. I do like what they return on this front part of this defense. And obviously, Walter Nolan, you got to talk about him, right? The number 1 recruit in the class of 2022 by ESPN and USA Today. A highly ranked recruit, obviously being the number 1 in those classes. Went to A&M, didn't quite work out for him at A&M, really couldn't seem to figure it out. A coaching change and other issues down there leads to him finding greener pastures up here in Oxford. This is a great ad for Lane Kiffin. One of those ads you look at and go, wow, what a move by the Rebels. A great ad for Kiffin, and Pete Golding, certainly a great ad for him. Pete Golding's been known as a recruiter. Some of his on-the-field coaching has been questioned, but no doubt that man can recruit. And he brings in Nolan, a fantastic high upside player who could really burst out and be that absolute star that everyone thought he was going to be coming out of high school.
In the run defense has certainly improved over the years. But again, last year, I said that going into the Georgia game, they've impressively rebuilt, their ability to stop the run. And what do? They get flat out gassed. 300 yards, 5 touchdowns, just looked like so much of old. And that's got to be incredibly demoralizing, Nick, despite the progression that they had been showing. Just wasn't meant to be last year. But bringing in Nolan's certainly going to help them improving. Middle of the defense, Sonterrain Perkins, at linebacker, an X5 star. He's got great athletic ability, heavy hitter. Great technique when tackling. He's a great gap closer. Played lots of edge last season as he has that versatility. He's going to be the main guy in the middle for him, though. And early on in his career, 4th game of his career against Alabama, he puts together 2 sacks. So certainly showcasing he can play with some of the top dogs. Alongside him, Chris Paul, a nice hard hitter, instinctive player, can get downhill in a hurry. Impressed as a pass rusher at times. He's on his 3rd different team, though. Rotated this group a good bit last year. Kahari Coleman really struggled in coverage, was quite absent versus tough competition. And TJ Dudley only played 1 game last year, but the starters should be set. Perkins is going to be elite. He's going to be one of the breakout players in the conference. But, how will his counterparts do, Nick?
Perkins is a fantastic player. 38 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. good numbers there. Coleman, 48 total tackles, but did look a little sloppy at times. I wasn't as impressed with him last season. 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. I think Perkins will be a great player, right, for this team. You highlight it, but the rotation of that unit is going to be the key, right? Is Chris Paul going to be able to step up and be a solid guy? Not sure what we're going to say to him. TJ Dudley, what's he going to look like when he's fully healthy? Is Coleman going to have a better season? Tyler Banks, another guy deeper on the depth chart. What can you see out of him? A lot of question marks there for me. I do think Perkins will be a fantastic leader as a sophomore, gaining more reps, gaining more experience in that middle of that defense.
You look at the secondary unit that's pretty talented, but they did give up almost 3,000 yards. They were down to about a 61% comp rate, though, so they certainly have shown nice flashes of being good. They do replace both starting corners with transfers. Trey Amos comes over from Bama. He was really good in his appearances for them. Showed a nice punch when playing press. Only allowed 100 yards and one missed tackle over 300 snaps. Isaiah Hamilton from Houston was good. A nice diagnoser in zone who has good twitch and ball skills, a guy that they're excited for. Brandon Turnage from Tennessee, it brings versatility, so the slot makes sense for him depending on how the safety group ends up. And I think they have a good duo here. Trey Washington and John Saunders were the best players on the team, I thought, last year. Both good tacklers and in coverage with 3 interceptions each. Want to see Saunders continue to improve his patience, though. Played a lot of slots, so the addition of Key Lawrence is going to be helpful for them in some regard. Good open field speed, good at tracking the ball. Overall playmaker, not exactly great in any one area, but, quality in numerous ones, that being Key Lawrence. Ian Banks, kind of a forgotten guy that not a lot of people have been talking about since they landed him. He's been a great slot corner for South Alabama. Wasn't as great this past season, but in 2022, he had 11 pass breakups and 6 interceptions. The role for him is unclear, as he's capable of playing free safety, but I think remaining in the slot with Saunders in the back end would be the best. This team really got hammered against play action last year, Nick. They did start allowing some bigger plays, again, against that tougher competition we keep alluding to. The A&M game, they shouldn't have been as bad as they were. LSU absolutely demolished them. And, of course, Georgia, they had success against everybody. I think stretching the field, though, is something that you can do against Ole Miss, but I definitely think there's a lot of good players in place here, and they can certainly make plays that allow them to win football games. But I definitely want to see them take that next step.
This unit that adds some nice pieces, has 2 good returning pieces in Washington and Saunders. Washington was the top tackler on this Ole Miss team last year. Again, love when you return your top tackler. 83 total tackles for him, 3 picks, 2 pass breakups, good numbers there. Saunders as well, 65 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 picks, 5 pass breakups, good numbers there. Trey Amos, I loved him at Alabama. I was disappointed to see him leave. I think he's a really good player when he was using the rotational. Him and Jalen Key were 2 really good rotational pieces for Alabama. Key got drafted as Mr. Irrelevant. Amos lands his feet at Ole Miss, a really good player. I think Ian Banks is a very high upside, great ad from South Alabama. Those defenses were really good. Key Lawrence, I like him to step up. Look at some of the freshmen they had as well. Anthony Robinson, Andy Jafai as well. Travarius Banks, really good freshmen out of high school, high-level recruits coming in. Isaiah Hamilton's a really solid player. He's slotted there at right cornerback. Chris Graves is a guy that got some small appearances last year, had a couple of tackles, 13 and 3 pass breakups. I think the secondary unit's good. I think they're going to get better as the season goes on. They struggled against tough opponents last year. I think they'll be better against those tougher opponents this year, but that could still be a make or break thing for this defense.
Rebels' defensive verdict, Kiffin has dug deep in transforming this defense. Back in 2020, they scored nearly 50 points on Alabama, and they still lost by double figures, giving up over 700 yards. That's how horrendous this group was, but the call has been more than answered. They brought in Golding. The staff has developed some of their own players while loading up big time in the portal, completely revamping this D-line. Nolan, Princely were already 2 of the SEC's best defenders. Perkins is going to have a big leap here. And the depth in the secondary of the turnies at safety, giving them a pretty high ceiling. Don't exactly see them turning up into an elite unit by any means, but a defense that can get you deep into a CFP run, I think. Leads me to the prediction. You just heard my thoughts on the defense. Love the added size and the talent up front. Linebacking core will need to amplify its play, though, to truly hit that next gear, and the run defense should be a more than serviceable unit, though, for an offense that's going to smash college football. I think this running back is as deep as I've ever seen. Our wide receiver room has great returning production, mixed with some younger cats that can make some plays. And, of course, Dart's third year has me incredibly hyped. The offensive line has some added, has got to get better with the added size, but leaning on them versus the elites will likely be their downfall. The timing is now for this team with the schedule, Nick. It's not overly difficult. Non-conference is a joke. They host a good Kentucky team, which I circled that as a trap game, even if it is at home, at LSU, and then at home against Georgia, being the blemishes there. Late in the year against Florida could be tough. I think Oklahoma, with their offense, could certainly turn this one into a shootout. But this schedule is honestly pretty crystal clear, Nick. It's pretty set up for them to be able to do damage. CFP or bust here for Ole Miss, 10-2. Anything worse than that, it's going to be a bitter disappointment.
It's put up or shut up time for Ole Miss fans, for Lane Kiffin, and the university as a whole. This team has to go out and perform. Kiffin has a loud mouth, one of the biggest names in college football, a guy that's super exciting to watch, has a great personality, but he has been known to talk a lot of trash and not back it up. You saw it against Georgia last year, saw it against Alabama 2 years ago with the whole popcorn thing. And in general, you've seen it during his time at Ole Miss. He passed up potential opportunities to coach at Auburn or Alabama. There were a lot of rumors linking into those two programs, how concrete they were. Who knows? But he brought in a ton of players. Pete Golding brought in a ton of players. Really good work from those two. But how's it going to look on the field? I'm not the biggest fan of teams that bring in a lot of transfers. I've voiced that opinion a few times on this podcast. So I'm a little more cautiously optimistic. I do have them at 10-2 making the playoff, but I am worried about this team. There's something that bothers me. Maybe it's the O-line. Maybe it's the secondary. Something out there bothered me with this team. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I get a little worried. I worry about that game against Kentucky. I worry about that game against Oklahoma. I worry about the two games that we have them penciled losing. I have the same two games losing as you do, LSU and Georgia. I worry about that. I worry about at Florida. Maybe they get upset by a Florida team that rounds into form as the season goes on in a tough place to play. Something is bothering me with this Ole Miss team, and Ole Miss fans are not going to like to hear me say that, and they're not going to really want to listen to that, but something is rubbing me the wrong way. This is the time, though. This is the time to strike an easy non-conference. I mean, a joke of a non-conference when you look at it, right? Georgia Southern, Wake Forest, Furman, Middle Tennessee. Absolute joke across the board. Kentucky, that's the game that you got to look at and say, hey, this is when it begins, right? Kentucky, a good Kentucky team, bringing them into town on September 28th. Then you get South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, and you play into your depth of your SEC schedule. They dodge Bama. They dodge Texas this year, two of the better teams in the conference. They dodge A&M as well. They get Georgia and LSU. Those are two monumental games as a program. Certainly that game, if they find a way to be undefeated and they play Georgia on November 9th undefeated, that could be the biggest game in the history of Ole Miss at this point in time. This is a very fascinating team with the portal work they've done, a very fascinating team in the NIL, and I'm really excited to see what they look like this year.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that sentiment. They played a lot of close games last year, and they probably shouldn't have. Tulane game was incredibly close for 4 quarters. Only beat Arkansas by 7 at home. The offense didn't look good there. At Auburn's tough, another 7-point victory. A&M, they gave up 35 and beat them by 3 in the last second something, I think. They only beat Mississippi State by 10. So, I mean, these are games they should have been winning by a lot more, and they just weren't able to do it. And it seemed, even though the offense did have 35 points per game, it certainly seemed they didn't look as good as they should have been. And obviously 73 against Mercer is obviously going to uplift that number. Even against Louisiana Monroe, they only hung 35 on them. So they want to see them play with high energy, want to see them play with more explosion and more urgency, and I think they certainly will this year. Like you said, put up or shut up time. Appreciate you joining me, Nick. As always, Ole Miss, a team that has a lot of excitement going into this season. It's glad that we got to be able to sit down here and discuss them.
Excited to see what this team can do, right? This is a very fun, exciting team, a team that really has a lot going for them. Should be a fun rocking time in Oxford for those fans this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.